Good day, everyone. You are listening to the Zulu Queen from South Africa Condemns this generation. Still on the subjects required when teaching the religious books. And today we look at the story of Elijah, on how it was misrepresented by the teachers of the law, after failing to understand the language full of figures of speech. I'm also inviting English teachers to join in the discussion to check the method that I am using in teaching the story, if it is the correct one or not. If I speak of a language, I don't mean how fluent you speak the language, but the deeper meaning of a language, the one used by Jesus when teaching the scriptures. In a language, there are figures of speech, and other writers like to use poetic language, which can easily be misinterpreted if the language and culture of the one telling the story or prophecy is not known, because the language always reflects who we are and where we come from as people. And in poetry is where a writer is allowed to play with words, and this is the reason why poetry is never easy, because you have to place yourself in the mind of the author to understand the message correctly, because a tree can mean a family tree and a branch can mean a generation. For myself, to understand the meaning behind every word used in the scriptures is because Jesus' language was Aramaic, which is very similar to my Zulu language. And when we study the book of Daniel, is where you will learn that Jesus, so as many other chosen people, were all influenced by the same culture as mine, speaking more or less the same language. The title I will give to the story is Elijah was killed in a war, not a miracle. Many teachers of the Bible believe that Elijah never died, but was taken up to heaven in a miraculous way, which does not match with the content of the story, making me believe that the story was taken out of context, ending up misleading many people. To understand Elijah's story, you need to know what was going on in his life and in his country, and that is explained clearly in the 1 Kings chapter 18 up to the 2 Kings, where Elijah is taken up to heaven. In the 1 Kings 18 verses 2 to 4 read thus: It was during the time of famine when King Ahab asked Obadiah to hide 100 of prophets in the caves from Queen Jezebel, who wanted to kill them. Obadiah was in charge of the palace and was loyal to the Lord. Obadiah then divided the prophets of the Lord into two groups and provided them with food and water. King Ahab then suggested that they go look at every spring and every riverbed in the land to see if they can find enough grass for the horses and mules to keep them alive. They agreed on which path to explore and set off in different directions. Analyzing the above verse, I find it very difficult to have 100 of prophets hiding in one place and being provided with food and water by the king and Obadiah. We are told that Obadiah was a devout worshipper of the Lord. And I want to know which Lord they are talking about in the story. Is it Lord God or Lord the King? Because we all know that a well-respected person is also addressed as my Lord. Understanding how the palace operates, we know that the king will have his right hand, servants, advisors, and his soldiers. And for the king to provide for these prophets makes me wonder if the word prophet was used as a figure of speech. We also learn that the king and Obadiah wanted to explore the place. Are they going to do that alone, or they will be accompanied by these two groups of prophets, since we are told that they were divided into two groups by Obadiah? The king also wanted to provide for the horses and mules so that they don't kill more animals due to starvation. This gives us an idea of the time period they were living in, allowing me to conclude that they were also using horses during war and as a means of transport. Back to the word prophets. A prophet is someone who foretells the future. And we all know that God has chosen his prophets to send his message all over the world. But I have never heard of a group of 100 of prophets in one place. And I can't stop wondering, who are these men hiding in the caves like rebels and soldiers and being provided with food by the king? Let us continue reading the story. As the king was separated with Obadiah, trying to find water for animals, along the way, Obadiah met with Elijah, and he feared for his life, that the king will kill him. But Elijah chose to spare Obadiah trouble and hand himself over to the king. This proves that the king and Elijah did not see eye to eye and was looking for him, of which Obadiah knew about. It is now clear that Elijah was also hiding in the mountains from someone. We also learn that Elijah spared Obadiah trouble by handing himself over to the king. And when he met the king called him a troublemaker, the very same name given to Tata Nelson Mandela as a troublemaker by his chief. I am not saying Mandela is Elijah, but I like to use examples when teaching because it is always easy to relate. Elijah then challenged the king by asking him to bring all the people of Israel and a total of 450 prophets of Baal, plus 400 prophets of goddess Asherah, which gives a total of 850 prophets. For Elijah to challenge the king gives us a hint of what was happening in the country, that it was during the war. And it becomes clear that this large number of prophets is more than the prophets we know, as Elijah was challenging them. Is he challenging them to foretell the future or to fight? We will know as we continue reading the story. In the 1 Kings 18 verse 40, after Elijah challenged the king of Baal and defeated the other prophets, we learn that he commanded the people to seize the prophets of Baal and led them by the river Kishon and kill them. We now learn for the first time that Elijah had followers who were prepared to fight for him and to take orders from him because they did what he commanded them to do, to kill the prophets of Baal, after he defeated all the king's prophets, confirming that they were fighting and that these prophets are soldiers. In the 1 Kings verse 45, that is where we learn of the word chariot, because Elijah sent a message to the king, asking the king to get into his chariot and go back home before the rain stops him. The word chariot is very important in the story of Elijah, because all the teachers of the Bible claim that Elijah was taken up to heaven miraculously by a chariot of fire in a whirlwind. And we need to learn how the word was used in the story to understand how Elijah died. We now know that Elijah is fighting with a king. And in my first lecture, I said there are many phrases that relate to water and war. And rain is another type of water that can hit you. For Elijah to warn the king of the rain that will stop him gives us an idea that the name rain was used as a figure of speech, and it can mean to be fired at and be killed. In my Zulu culture, if someone is attacked unexpectedly, we say zamneta, which can literally mean rain fell over him, as an expression of being attacked. If the word rain means that, it's clear that Elijah was asking the king to surrender or to go back home, otherwise he will be killed. And if King Ahab was using a chariot as Elijah asked him to get into his chariot and run, gives us another clue that they were using horses as chariots of fire or chariots of war when fighting. And this description will help us put the story in context on how Elijah was killed. In 1 Kings 19 verse 2 to 3, we learn that Elijah fled from the queen, which proves that they were fighting because the queen promised to kill Elijah's people, like Elijah had killed his prophets. I am still trying to make people understand why Elijah was on the run, proving that it was during the war. And people were starving because the food was given to the soldiers, something that we witnessed during the First World War and the Second World War. And that is why Obadiah and the king were focusing on feeding their prophets, which is now clear that these prophets were soldiers. And I will explain later why they were referred to as prophets. In 1 Kings 20, verse 1 to 3, we learn of another looming war where King Ben-Hadad of Syria was gathering his troops. King Ben-Hadad was supported by 32 other rulers who were willing to join forces with him to form an alliance. These 32 rulers came with their horses and chariots and laid a siege to Samaria. At least we now know that the war was between Syria and Samaria. And applying what is happening now in Syria, witnessing different groups fighting against the government and against each other, trying to be in control of the country, is exactly what was happening in Elijah's time. For the king to have 32 rulers forming alliance with him is something that we see every day with the United States of America, forming alliances with other Western countries, attacking countries like Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya. The same happened during the Second World War when many countries formed an alliance against Germany. King Ben-Hadad demanded King Ahab to hand over all his gold, wealth, including women, and Ahab agreed, and the king demanded more. And that is when King Ahab cried out to other rulers, telling them that he wants to destroy them. Other rulers advised King Ahab to ignore the request and not to give in, something we saw in the Middle East when Saddam was threatening Kuwait and the United States of America asked them not to give in, ending up forming an alliance with Kuwait to defeat Saddam. We learn that one of the prophets of King Ahab recommended that young soldiers should lead the army, and that is how he won the battle against King Ben-Hadad. Analyzing all what has been discussed in the above verses gives me an answer that I have been looking for on what was happening in the country and why Elijah was hiding in the caves with his men, so as King Ahab and Obadiah, that it was in the middle of the war. Not only I was able to reveal that, but also reveal that they were using chariots of fire in their wars. I can now continue applying what I have revealed in the story to find out what happened to Elijah. In the 1 Kings 20 verse 23, after they were defeated, King Ben-Hadad's officials said that the gods of Israel are mountain gods, and that's why they defeated them. And he decided to replace the 32 rulers with the field commanders so that they fight them in the plains. But still, we are told that they were defeated by the Syrians. They are now talking about the gods. Who are the gods? We are the gods. As I was teaching in my previous lectures, I kept on saying we are the gods, and the best God with a capital letter G like Jesus will come amongst us because of his works. But we will learn about this subject when discussing who is God. Another thing that we learn from this verse is that King Ahab's soldiers were very good in fighting in the mountains. But even when they were put in the plains, they were also good. Let us continue read from the Bible. In the 1 Kings 22, verses 19 to 23, King Ahab wanted to know on how he will perform in a war if he attacks the Syrians. So he called all the prophets to find out, and they all blessed the king. At last, King Ahab wanted Micaiah to bless him, even though he knew that he never supported him. The officials went out to look for Micaiah, and before he even gets to the king, he was warned by the officials not to speak against the king. Likewise, when Micaiah was asked if he sees the king winning the war, he answered by saying, "Of course you will win," but Ahab demanded the truth. The reason why Ahab demanded the truth from Micaiah is because he knew him very well of what he will approve of and not approve. That is when Micaiah told the king the truth, that he sees the army of Israel scattered all over the hills without a shepherd, which means defeat. But many preachers of the Bible calls Micaiah a spirit of lies, of which is not true, because he was saying what the officials wanted him to say. And for the king to ask for him is because he knew that he was a spirit of truth. And if he gets his approval, that was a win for the king. But even after the king was warned by Micaiah that he saw his soldiers without a shepherd, but chose to believe lies that were forced on Micaiah, and he attacked the Syrians. Looking at what is described above is very common for a king or a leader to call his advisors before engaging in a war. We saw it with President Obama when he wanted approval from the House to attack Syria, but was denied by the vote. This is where the story gets interesting. As we continue reading, we learn that a Syrian soldier shot an arrow which struck King Ahab and was wounded as he cried out to his chariot driver. He remained in his chariot, and the blood ran down, covered the bottom of his chariot, and died. We all remember when Elijah asked the king to get into his chariot and go home until the rain stops him, validating my claims that the name rain was used as a figure of speech for being attacked and killed. This description of how the king was killed when he was shot by an arrow helps us understand the type of weapons they were using during that time. And to be shot at is the same as being fired at. And we can now take this information with us to learn on how Elijah was killed. We end our lecture for today, and next time we will continue with part 2 on how Elijah was taken up to heaven. And for those who want to learn more about the Zulu Queen from South Africa Condemns This Generation, should go to Mega Books and click under religion, or search it on Kindle Books. Goodbye and stay blessed.